Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples,
The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and to have men call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teachers, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on it, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And he who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our forefathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the sin of your forefathers. You snakes! You brood of vipers! How will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so, upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, all this will come upon this generation.
It's a pretty powerful piece of video, isn't it? It almost makes me feel uncomfortable when I watch it. My natural instinct is to avoid conflict, and whenever I sense that someone's about to get into a fight, I can feel the tension like a ball in the pit of my stomach. But I think that video makes us uncomfortable for a couple of other reasons as well. And the first is that we probably very rarely think about Jesus speaking and acting in that way. I mean, how many times have you either read or heard this passage read, or any of the other passages in the gospel that are like it? How often have you read or heard that passage read in and around the church? If you've been around a church for any length of time, the answer is probably at least several times. And so, in those at least several times that you've heard or read this passage, how many times did it sound like it did in that video? Probably not many. It's hard to replicate the anger and directness of the biblical text sometimes, partly because we're so familiar with it. Or it could be because we tend to read or hear it in such a peaceful, sanitized setting as this sanctuary. I mean, when we come on Sunday morning, we're not looking for any trouble. We just want to worship God and get recharged for the week ahead, right? Well, the other reason that I think it makes us uncomfortable is that probably deep down, we all know that there are things in our lives that Jesus would speak the same way to us about as he does the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Now, I'm not saying we're guilty of the same things that he accused them of in this video, but that we all know that from time to time in our lives, we have created double standards for ourselves because it was either too painful or too difficult or too embarrassing to do the thing that we know that Jesus would call us to do. And so, as we start this new sermon series on biblical concepts of justice, I want us to keep this edgy feeling in the backs of our minds. Because doing justice is far from easy. And doing justice often will lead us to places and to people that we never thought we would ever be involved with. And that can be hard. And it can be uncomfortable. But it's necessary. But why? Why is doing justice necessary? Well, first and foremost, it's necessary because Jesus demands it of us. In the midst of his diatribe against the religious leaders in the video we just watched, Jesus makes a very important statement, a statement that I want to make sure that we don't miss this morning. And it's in verse 23, and in that verse, Jesus sums up his entire argument in this passage. And he says this: "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former." In that verse, Jesus identifies the more important matters of the law as three things: faithfulness, mercy, and justice. Now, those are three things that we talk about a lot. But how do they relate to God's law? What makes them so important? And what exactly is Jesus getting at? Well, let's take a closer look. The first of the three attributes is faithfulness. And faithfulness is something that we do pretty well here at St. Peter's. Faithfulness would include things like worship, Bible study, Sunday school, prayer, devotion, things many of us do on a daily basis. We have a good crowd on Sunday mornings for worship. We have a number of active ministry groups, both here in the congregation and reaching out to the wider community. We do a pretty good job at faithfulness. And faithfulness makes us feel good. And it should. Through faithfulness, we draw closer to God. We increase our faith. And we embrace the larger world around us. Faithfulness provides us with personal and spiritual growth, which in turn should make meeting the other two standards of the law easier to achieve. The second matter of the law is mercy. And mercy, well, mercy is what it sounds like: providing care and comfort for those in pain or in want or in need. Sometimes we might call this mission work. It can be opportunities to raise money for organizations like United Caring Services or Habitat, or donating to programs like One Great Hour of Sharing. It's what we did when we bought school supplies for the kids at Grandin. It's what we do when we collect food for the food pantry. It's something that we do almost instinctively, trying to reach out and help those in need. And doing mercy work also makes us feel good. We can see the smiles on the faces of the children as they pick out new backpacks for the new school year. We get a sense of fulfillment when we spend a day building a Saw's wheelchair ramp. We know we've made a difference when we're able to give someone money so that they and their family can eat. It's good and important work. And as a congregation, we do a pretty good job at mercy, too. The third item on Jesus' list is justice. And justice is a lot harder, and it's a lot more complicated. But Jesus calls us to justice work in the same way that he calls us to faithfulness and mercy. You've likely heard the old saying, give someone a fish and they eat today. Teach someone to fish and they eat every day. Well, that's sort of the difference between mercy and justice. When doing mercy, we're addressing the real and immediate needs of someone. When we do justice, we're trying to correct the situation that put that person in the need of mercy in the first place. Justice work is difficult work because it forces us to admit that this world we live in is far from the kingdom of God that Jesus calls us to build. And that's because the God of justice stands in stark opposition to the empire. In biblical times, the empire was embodied by Pharaoh, who stood in opposition to God's call through Moses. In Jesus' day, the empire was Rome, taxing and abusing non-Romans in its system of wealth, superiority, and privilege. Today, the empire is best identified as our market economy and all the things that come with it. For example, in God's economy of justice, relationships are what give life meaning. It's through personal connections that we feed our desire for companionship, and also through those relationships that we learn of the struggles and injustices suffered by others. In the market God's economy, it's possessions and experiences that give life meaning. After all, the one with the most when they die wins, right? God's economy of justice teaches us that there is abundance when the market is preaching scarcity. God's economy of justice tells us there is hope when the market promotes fear. God's economy of justice is built on promise, while the market is built on despair. And God's economy of justice revolves around the well-being of the entire community, while the market serves to feed only our own egos. And that makes it really hard to think about justice, because justice stands in the face of just about everything we've ever been led to believe is true. The truth is that God's economy of justice is not compatible at all with the world in which we live. And it never has been. Over the next few weeks, we're going to take a look at a few of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. We'll look at how they addressed issues of injustice. And through those examples, we'll try to get a better understanding of what Jesus called to do justice really means for each of us. And that's important, because justice isn't just one of the three key components of God's law, which would make it important enough on its own. But it's important because justice is the foundational moral underpinning of God's dream for life in the coming kingdom. Because as many have observed, the moral arc of the universe is long. But indeed, it bends toward justice. Thanks be to God. Amen.